One cannot discuss Chinese philosophy without addressing philosophy of education. The philosophy of education is a major component of Chinese traditional philosophy. Great thinkers like Confucius and Zhu Xi have tried to develop an educational philosophy based on cultivating virtues through education and other means. Educational philosophy became a separate discipline within the last 100 years after many Chinese scholars returned to China after studying abroad, bringing with them new ideas and new ways of thinking. The first upsurge of philosophy of education in China occurred in the 1920s and 30s. At that time, a school system copied from Japan had been established. What helped fuel this upsurge was the influence of educational philosophy of Western cultures, along with the increasing number of Chinese academics who attempted to develop their own philosophy of education. In particular, it was John Dewey's pragmatism and the theory of democratic education that was viewed as being the key to changing the existing educational system. Fan Shuokang published the first book of philosophy and of education in 1928. The ideas in his book did not focus on American pragmatism, but instead on continental philosophies. Fan applied logic, systematic aesthetics, and ethics to the discussions of educational issues. These approaches shaped the destiny of contemporary philosophy of education in China. This first upsurge lasted only for a short time, and due to the Japanese invasion and the Second World War, philosophy of education in China went into decline and virtually stopped after 1949. During the 1950s and 60s, China incorporated educational theories from the Soviet Union, and both the Chinese traditional philosophy and Western philosophy were criticized, downgraded, and suppressed. As a result, the development of philosophy of education in mainland China was crippled, and only the Marxist approach prevailed. Not surprisingly, during the Cultural Revolution, only one kind of educational theory was available, which was grounded in the ideology of class struggle. Quite the opposite was happening in Taiwan. Among the many scholars who rejected communism and settled in Taiwan in 1949 were three that were to have a great influence on the development of philosophy of education: Tian Peilin, Wu Zhensheng, and Huang Qiancheng. They were determined to continue the study of philosophy of education in an age of turmoil. Tian Peilin was heavily influenced by the work of the German philosopher Edward Spranger, and it is because of Tian Peilin that the development of philosophy of education has a strong connection with the German tradition of general pedagogy. On the other hand, Wu Zhensheng was influenced greatly by the work of John Dewey. His book, The Outline of Philosophy of Education, first published in 1935, was arguably the most influential work of philosophy of education in Taiwan. Huang Qiancheng is less well known, but his books Comparative Ethics and Philosophy of Education are still highly regarded in Taiwan. Philosophy of education in mainland China was reborn after China opened up to the world in the 1970s. In the mid-1980s, the Philosophy of Education Society of China was established and an annual university conference was held. Since then, academic community of philosophers of education has made great efforts to cultivate the philosophy of education that bears the characteristics of modern Chinese culture. The development of philosophy of education in Taiwan is also promising. There are at least 40 professional philosophers of education teaching in various universities and teacher training institutes, half of them trained in the West. There are three main influences on contemporary Chinese philosophy of education: classical Chinese philosophy, Western philosophy, and Marxist theory. Since the Cultural Revolution and the implementation of the open door policy, Chinese society has changed dramatically and the established cultural identity has been challenged. Huang Ji is a leading expert in this field and believes that possible solution is to adopt ancient traditions and search for coping methods. In his 1994 book, Introduction to Chinese Traditional Philosophy of Education, he argues that the Confucian idea of humanity and the ultimate aim of education is to cultivate the virtuous individual as a whole. Huang Li, along with several other philosophers of education, are trying to retrieve, reflect upon, and reinterpret the philosophies of traditional philosophers in order to develop a new philosophy in the context of today's world. Many believe that interpreting Confucian ideas under the present cultural circumstances is important to education in general and to the development of educational philosophy. The reason for this is that goodness and benevolence are the core ideas of Confucianism, With Confucianism, the end of education is to guide people to pursue moral perfection in realizing the life that performs goodness and benevolence. Education is regarded as guidance in the pursuit of realization of universal harmony and peace, including human harmony with nature, society, others, and oneself, and the harmony between different nations and cultures. Many contemporary philosophers of education are interpreting Western philosophy of education and applying the concepts, thoughts, and methodologies to the issues and problems of education in China. Jin Shengheng has explored the relationship between people's spiritual existence and the education of the whole person in an age of nihilism and technology infatuation. Jin aimed to promote educational reform by introducing the ideas of personal knowledge and indigenous knowledge into the school curriculum. The Marxist approach is still visible throughout Chinese philosophy of education. It took root in China during the Cultural Revolution because it had a revolutionary undertone which fit with the zeitgeist of the time. It also had similarities with Confucianism, as it stressed moral education that indoctrinated a collectivist moral code. The Marxist socialist theory of a person's whole development still underpins the goal of Chinese public education today. It should be noted that Huang Ji's 1982 book, Introduction to Philosophy of Education, was the first serious work on the philosophy of education since the Cultural Revolution, and it paved the way for all future study and work in this field. In Taiwan, the Western philosophies of education have been prominent, in particular the work of John Dewey. More recently, however, feminism, constructivism, environmental ethics, and human rights theories as they relate to education have taken root in Taiwan. But still, the mainstream of Chinese philosophy, Taoism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Neo-Confucianism continues to play a part in the development of the philosophy of education in Taiwan.